we usually talk or have been talking a lot about home education. Today we're taking a leaf out of the book of Stephen Covey, and we're going to do the 7 habits of highly effective crisis homeschoolers. So we're focusing today on all those people who are struggling through the COVID-19 crisis and suddenly have had their kids doing homeschooling. And what we're going to, and okay, now this is a disclaimer, then we're going to go through these, maybe more than 7 habits, there may be less. We'll see what we think. At the end, maybe, Joshua, you and I should sort of say, are we going to agree that this is a habit or not? And come up with our definitive list. But we're just shamelessly playing off. We're just shamelessly playing off the 7 habits value. Yeah, this is just a piece of marketing. And then what we'll do is we'll go through, but I think hopefully there's some serious content in here.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's do this.
But we're just playing off, but we're just going to play off the 7 habits here, and we're going to go from there. Okay, so habit number 1, and you can tell me if you think it's a good one or not, is what I think at this time is quite important for parents, but probably for everyone to do, is to follow your intuition. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of parents, and just in life in general, most of us, what we've done is there are many more times when the amount of times we've actually listened to, or maybe put it a different way and say, the amount of times that we regret not following our intuition greatly outweighs the number of times that we have followed our intuition and the results we got from that.
This is a great point, Christopher. So intuition is a really interesting thing, right? So if you look at the world as a very complicated system, which it is, it's much more complicated than we can almost think, right? And so anything that's not very complicated, we can handle with our sort of clear thinking part of our minds. But things that are very new and beyond our scope, our intuition is actually quite good at handling these kinds of things. If you feel, someone is dangerous, or there's some dangerous situation, something feels wrong, something feels off, that usually is the best bet to follow that, because it comes up when you're handling something which is almost beyond your reach. So if you can see your clarity of thought as this like little bright light in the darkness, the intuition is like just on the edge. That part you can't fully understand, but it's on the edge, and that's where the most dangerous things can lie. So it might be a good idea to follow your intuition on things that feel dangerous. Yeah. Right.
And so I think the point is that anything that's new, anything that's unexpected, that's kind of like maybe the mind's way of telling us this is, I can't fully work through this logically, but there's this area of intuition, and I should actually follow it. So we must probably say, go with your gut, and perhaps we can say that's a good habit to have, particularly at a time like this, where this someone said, a lot of people are getting upset about COVID-19 and all of the things that surround it, but one of the issues is that it's very difficult to make decisions because it's not a situation you've been in before.
Yes.
Okay. Then this is something that's a little bit difficult for most homeschoolers, is or I shouldn't say it's difficult for homeschoolers, but it's something that kind of is not something that homeschoolers consider very much. It's this issue of beginning with the end in mind, or having an end that's quite close. So I think what a lot of people who are doing, so homeschooling is often a lifelong journey. Home education is a lifelong journey for a whole family. I mean, you're in varsity now and you're in formal education, but I bet you're still doing some home education for your brothers and sisters.
Yes, I'm assisting them, sometimes helping them with some stuff, work. And it's really nice because then I can tell my younger brothers, like, you have to write the plus minus when you do a square root. When you find the square root of something, it's going to bite you later if you don't do it. And then they actually believe me, right? So you have to make it a habit. On the topic of habits,
one of our previous videos, you spoke about authoritarianism. I'm getting a little bit worried about you now.
But no, the point I explained to them why, because there are two answers, right? If it's not true, just write them. Yeah.
But the point is that it's often a lifelong journey for a family. It's a long-term thing. It's an introduction to lifelong learning. Sometimes it's even multi-generational. So we had a very long conversation when people were when we were around with a lot of young home educators who either were just finishing or were doing home education, or in the last years of home education, or started varsity, and they were asking, would I be able to home educate my children? So, I mean, and those are people in 18, 19 kind of thing are thinking in that long term. So it's also sometimes like a multi-generational journey. But I think the issue is
home educators begin with the end in mind, but the end is more long term than some of the current like crisis home educators would have. And so this is something we should talk about, yeah.
Okay, so let's look at some of those. So that's not something that we are kind of used to thinking about, because we see this as a very long-term kind of process. However long if it takes you long to get there, it's the journey that matters, etc., etc. Now, a lot of people, so I think people at the moment in South Africa, they've kind of got a couple of terminal dates. So when they begin with the end in mind, I think it's quite important to say there's some people who are quite keen to go back in September, when our spring starts, and when our and also hopefully after the peak in the coronavirus infections, and that's when they're thinking of starting to go back to school. Then we've got a number of people who've actually made an in-principle decision they're not going back before 2021. And there's a whole lot of implications that follow from that, but we're not really going to do too many. We won't go into those. And then there's a lot of people that are looking at, and then we've just been looking at some research from the States, and people in the States actually taking a very different view. They're not taking such a date-driven view. It's also got to do with the fact that their school year begins in September. A lot of them aren't taking a date-driven view. A lot of them saying kids aren't going back until we have a vaccination. So that's kind of like the spectrum of people who are involved. I think the point is that I think there's only really one point to be made here, and which is that the closer the end is for you, the closer the goal that you want to achieve, the more important it is that you must probably stick more closely to the schooling system, and then from there, but also to always be flexible, but just be aware that kind of, if you're hoping to get back into school in September, now isn't the time to start experimenting with sort of all sorts of new theories and approaches. But then even but you've got more. You're going to have more flexibility if you're looking, and we'll look at some of these habits later on, which maybe can show ways that you could use that time more effectively.
Yeah, this sort of acts as sort of a disclaimer to some of the other habits, because these other habits that will follow, I assume, some of them will venture and be more applicable to people who are have more long-term goals, right? And so just keep that in mind, that where your goal would be.
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll maybe, because you're a passionate home educator, much probably even more passionate than I am, or more passionate. So I may pull you back and say, let's just look at how that habit would be for someone who's doing it in a shorter time frame. So this is something that helps people out right now, crisis homeschoolers who are intending going back into the schooling system. Although was probably what we should have said. But although you are very welcome, you're very welcome to join us. We want to welcome you to our homeschooling.
We want you to be a long-term home educator, most definitely.
And we'd love you to be a long-term educator. But you're welcome for however long you stay. So let's go on quickly and do a couple of other. Let's go through a few of these. I think this is something you're quite passionate about, so you may want to jump in here. So I said one of the habits is be willing to take a break. And I know you've spoken about, you've been opposed to this idea where people say, if a child misses 6 months of school, they will never catch up, and that young children need to learn lots of new things. Okay,
so let me take a bit of more time on this one. Yeah, let's just slide into this one. So it's like a hot tub almost. So I'm coming to this at this from a very technologically engaged point of view. So I'm a computer scientist. I'm studying computer science, and I've worked as a computer science before in software before I studied. So I spent a year just working, seeing if I wanted to do it, developing some software that actually some home educators are actually using for like some extracurricular work. So that's I won't say what software, but that I've done that as well. And at the moment, I'm programming for the university for some of the researchers, doing some what they call model checking software. So basically, software that checks how good another piece of software is in how safe it is in a sort of a mathematical sense almost. So, but doing the programming for that. And from that perspective, so it's sort of funny when I hear people talking about what you need to be successful in the technological, modern, fourth industrial revolution kind of world. And they always have this idea that we should work more hours and do more things on screen to be good at this. But it's not a good idea. And here's the reason why. Everyone's on screens in any case the whole time. It's not hard to see people on social media using their screens. It's not hard to be a consumer of media. It's really hard to be a creator and to be of media and of software and technological systems. That's much more difficult. And that requires something more than just being able to solve a problem that you've seen before, right? You have to solve new problems. And to solve new problems, a really big part of that is being able to think slower and more deeply about things and thinking about them over a longer period of time. And to do that, you have to have time to get bored, to practice that. To actually practice being good at that, you have to have time to go into it. If you run at a high edge pace, trying to just do everything one after the other, you are missing a big part of what it takes to be at the top of your game in many fields. And that is the capacity to actually slow down over something and think about it almost subconsciously. So I frequently, when I'm programming, I'll be programming for a few hours, or say half an hour, and then I'll stop and I'll go for a walk, and I'll sort of subconsciously think about it, and then I'll come back and continue with my work. But that sort of style of approaching work, doing really difficult things, but doing it at a slower pace, is very valuable in the modern world, to be able to actually solve problems that hasn't been solved before. And to do that, you also have to have the capacity to play and have time to stop and to be bored. I mean, there's a very interesting book I read about the title was Future Minds, and this guy was doing research, and he talked to lots of like professionals in many very high end, like complicated fields, and asked them when do they get their best ideas, just to have some sort of a data set of where people have their best ideas. And lots of them said like in the bath, or high up in an airplane looking out the window, or while they're driving, or sort of the situations where they actually aren't busy at their office, busy working. And this, I think, Christopher, many people can attest to this, that you actually find and solve any problems when you're actually when you don't have to do anything.
I've got a funny story. So I've got a funny story on that one, which is the two parts. I couldn't agree with you more. I think one of the big problems, and we'll actually do a video on this sometime. We'll get a curriculum specialist in, and what we do is we'll look at the CAPS curriculum and see how one of its biggest problems, from my perspective, and I actually showed this to a university professor, an education professor who actually didn't necessarily mean curriculum development, and she was really shocked when I actually showed her what the curriculum actually looks like. But the problem is so a couple of quick points. One is that the curriculum that I was educated under, the Christian National Education curriculum, it wasn't necessarily a great curriculum from a whole lot of criteria perspectives. But what it did allow us is it did allow us a lot of free time. And it allowed us time to get bored. It allowed us time to go into libraries and read and do things ourselves. So I think but what it allowed at the time, and maybe I'm not using the correct technical term, but it allowed time for integrative thinking, where you get your best ideas when you're actually not working all the time at something. So just to show you that this is true across all fields, you in computer science are much more in strategy and marketing and communications. And the great David Ogilvy from Ogilvy Mather, he always said, go for long walks and take showers to have creative ideas. And what we used to have and I often used to encounter in the workplace. This is what I often encounter in the workplace. So we'd be facing a creative challenge, and then my staff would say to me, Christopher, go to the toilet, because I think when water runs, I think, right?
That's actually, I was telling you that book, that was like one of the big sort of overarching context was water, showers, baths. That's very interesting. Water is a.
So literally, people say to me, "You go to the toilet now." So I'm saying, okay, I'm the boss here. Please, let me just get that right. Can we just all understand that? And I'll go to the bathroom, and I like to go to the bathroom. but inevitably, I would go to the bathroom and come back and say, "The way we're going to solve this is by doing X, Y, and Z."
There's an interesting quote by maybe not the most easy person to quote, but Friedrich Nietzsche said that only the ideas begotten while walking are worth anything.
Okay.
And
so I think one of the things that people can do, and one of the good habits, if they can do it in this time, is to give kids that time to do some of that integrative thinking. But of course, once again, let's just give the warning that depends on how much time you've got. So if you're kind of getting ready to get back your kids back, and whenever we haven't, I don't think we've. I mean,
if you're still working with your school to sort of stay with them, obviously you have to follow their structure, and you can't fall too far behind because you want to work with them. But I think the point is, it's actually quite hard to be bored, especially today. It's so easy to just hop on a screen and just watch some snippet or a little video, or scroll through Facebook, or do something. And even little kids are on tablets a lot, and it's hard work to become used to being bored. And to become used to being bored and thinking on your own is necessary as a necessary skill for technical and hard and difficult problem solving in very many fields in life for the future. So it's not like being bored is a waste of time. It's actually maybe worth a lot more than actually working, because people being distracted in the workplace and in their lives through just never having a chance to focus deeply on something is a big problem. And it's because they can't be bored. They just get this incredible itch, and they have to satisfy that media.
Yeah. So maybe even to just say that it's not necessarily just being bored in that sense, but it is a sense of being able to have this variety of work. So it's to have that time to go and take a walk, or water the garden, or do some physical work after you've done a lot of intellectual work. And that's where that kind of integrative thinking takes place.
Yeah, bored might be the wrong word. Yeah, so I use the word sort of bored because it's such less intense stimulation than people are used to, especially with media and technology, to have the whole time, that it feels like boredom in the beginning. But if you get used to it, it's much more satisfying than that flashing impulse that you've basically scratched.
Yeah. And I think the point about talking about flashing impulse brings us to the issue of looking at the whole issue of maybe unplugging a little bit, and taking that time to be. And I think what's very interesting is that a lot of people who actually work in technology themselves are not constantly plugged into technology. That seems to.
Yes,
so
that's definitely. I can attest to that. That's definitely a fact. Yes.
Okay, and so just a couple of quick things also about this. I think just when we're talking about being willing to take a break, is that a lot of people take a gap year. A lot of people start one degree and find that it's not for them, and then do a second degree. So taking that time, there's not, unless there's a particular financial reason in your family, and there's no reason why you can't be doing some work if you're taking that break. A gap year doesn't have
That's
to be
what I
something
did. I worked, yes. Yeah. I worked in my gap year.
It doesn't have to be something funded by mom and dad. And in fact, let's be honest, you're not going to be traveling around next year, most probably, to Bora Bora and Machu Picchu, right? So the point is, it can be work, it can be many different things, ways of taking a gap year. But often in the long run, that pays off because you're more sure about what you're going to do than if you, for example, started doing a degree in psychology or something and then found that was not what you really wanted to do. So I think these gaps are built into the system anyway, because people are under so much pressure that they feel they need these gaps. And at the moment, you've been given an opportunity to take a gap. And I think that unless you are, as we were saying, unless you are very much tied into that system and you're pretty sure you're going back whenever they declare the whatever the September, October term return is, and I think that's where a lot of people are, unless you're very much tied into that system, it would be really good to start thinking about allowing your kids to take a gap.
Yeah, don't overestimate how safe the system is to point you in the direction of having a fulfilling life. It's worthwhile to take your own time to think about these things, and for your children to do that as well for themselves, right? It's not. Yeah.
No, carry on. I was just going to say, maybe unpack that a little bit more, because I'm not sure that I'm following you saying.
Okay, so what I mean is, it's easy to, when you're busy in school or in university or whatever, to just follow the system. Okay, next month I'm writing this test, and then I just do these things after each other, and then you finish with school and you're like, what am I going to study? And then you pick something and you're in the system again, and then you're finished with studying, and then you're like, now I'm supposed to be on my way now, right? But don't overestimate how good of a bet that is, to just assume that when you get at the end, and when your kids get at the end, they're going to be like, oh, this was all worth it. It was perfect. It's exactly what I needed to do. To be a person that acts in the world in a fulfilling and a useful manner, you actually need that reflection to sort of know what's valuable, what's really valuable to you. And to actually know what's really valuable, you sort of need to step away from the things that keep your attention the whole time. Maybe it's not, those things don't deserve your attention, but you never find out because you never step away.
Yeah, so I think one quick point on that before we move on is that in some ways the system can often be a bit like a factory. And you kind of put a bottle in at grade R, and that bottle pops out section 1 of the factory at grade 7. I think I'm a bit old, so I have to work these things out. And then goes into a new factory until grade 12, and then pops out and then goes into a new factory and pops out after university. And it's only right that when the bottle comes out, whether you have a chance to start thinking about whether you wanted to be in that factory system, in a sense, all the way along. So,
but now you've got a chance. Now you've actually got a chance. The factory sort of has problems, and you've got a chance to think about it. Use it.
No, the bottles can jump off the conveyor belt if they want to. This is a little story that I always liked, and maybe you can give some comment on it, which is, I'm saying one good habit is taking time. It's related to this previous point. So I don't know if we can kind of count it as 2 habits, but we'll take time to get on the bike is what I'm calling it. And it's the story of a guy sees a man running along next to the bike, and he says, you'd get there quicker if you actually stopped and got on the bike. And he says, no, well, my problem is that I don't have time to stop to get on the bike. And I have the experience of...
That's a very good analogy.
I have the experience of a lot with, particularly with kids, friends and family, is that people in my kids will, for example, have a whole lot of free internet resources, Khan Academy, all sorts of things. And then they'll hear from other kids, no, I'm really struggling with this particular part of maths or this particular, let's just say this particular section of maths. And they'll say, well, go and watch this video and it will help you. And then kids who are in the schooling system are coming back and saying, I just don't have the time to do that. I need to know the answer for next Tuesday or tomorrow or Monday morning. I don't know if that's the experience that you've had. And I think the opportunity is also, I think that, when you're in that kind of system, a lot of gaps build up, and then you get to a situation.
That's something that happens really easily, that needing the answer now, if you're following some very strict schedule from someone else and you just have to try to fit into that. And that's sort of, and it's not very good. It's not a very efficient way of learning, right? Because you're just learning to remember it tomorrow, not to actually fully integrate it into yourself. So I've experienced that when I try to finish something really quickly. And so I just have to quickly find something and then continue. And sometimes it's necessary. But if you can actually pause and take a bit more time, you are better and more efficient, and you get whatever you're doing, it turns out better. So yes, it's like the bike. If you really need to get at that door right now, maybe it's good to not get on the bike. But if you want to go far, get on the bike.
Yeah, and that relates to our point of knowing about keeping the ending, beginning with the end in mind. Depending on where your end is, you may have to run next to the bike. But of course, I think everyone sees that in the long-term efficiency, it would be better to actually stop and get on the bike and start riding the bike. But of course, you may not be able to do that. But But that's once again what we're saying. That's one of the things about home education is you can take the time to get on the bike and find something and find a way of learning that actually suits you. One of the other things that we're seeing a lot of at the moment, maybe you're not necessarily as much as I do, is a lot of confusion that people are having over legal issues. We actually did a video before this, which people can watch, on the cons of home education. And what we said there was that one of the cons of home education is that you often have to get a lot more involved in legal issues because you're not in as formatted a system as you are in school. And then what we found is that, but I think people are finding that now who are coming into crisis homeschooling. I don't know if you've had any experiences or you want me to answer that more.
I think this is something which is more your kind of field.
Okay, so I think the point is that what I really want to say to people is it's a very important habit if you are getting into that situation to get legal advice. And I think, we had this as a con for home education, and we said we'd come back to it in our previous video. That's the second plug for the previous video. Note that, by the way. But we had this as a con for home education. But in fact, it's a con for schooling as well. It's just that it was hidden until now. And I think a lot of people have been bitten by it because what they've kind of gone in, been under a lot of pressure, signed up to get their kids signed up to school. There's only so many places, it's open day, etc. Haven't looked at the contracts that they're signing. And a lot of people are now complaining because a lot of those contracts, okay, this is a bit technical, but a lot of those contracts don't have what they call force majeure provisions or force majeure clauses, which say and force majeure says if there's something like this, like what they call an act of God or something that stops schools delivering in terms of their contract, there's no way for you to get out. Now, so I think this is very true of all schooling, except that it's hidden under the schooling system, because when the schooling system is running, these problems don't occur. But if you think about it, your schooling is most probably in a family's budget one of the most expensive sort of line items in your family's budget, and you should spend as much time interrogating the contracts you sign, as we say in the Roman Dutch law, caveat emptor and caveat subscriptor. Let the buyer beware and let the signer beware. You should, because the responsibility is on you to check those things. And the courts won't say, well, you didn't check those things. You've got to check those things.
Yeah.
And that's true if you're buying life insurance or medical aid or whatever, and equally true with schooling. So we're sometimes a little bit nervous because we think it's kind of like maybe trying to bargain or sort of over your child's education, and you're not a good parent if you interrogate all of the terms and conditions and you make sure that you get value for money. But I like saying, take those financial skills that you've got in the rest and apply it to schooling, particularly because it's the biggest. In many families' budgets, it's a big percentage of their budget. I mean, I know a lot of people where one of the parents works just to pay the school fees, and that's a hell of a lot of work to do, and they're not spent time making sure you're in the right legal position. So I think a lot of people are experiencing, I see a lot of it on the kind of Facebook forums and WhatsApp groups, is that people are there's a lot of confused and conflicting advice. And so I think an important habit is to get good legal advice. Yeah. The situation is very fluid at the moment. So be very careful where people say things like you must or you must not. There's no such thing as generic legal advice, in the sense that I can't advise you unless I know all of your circumstances. And I'm saying if a lawyer can't advise you, and no lawyer will give generic legal advice. So what I'm really advising to people, and what I'm saying is a habit that people really should have, irrespective throughout their schooling, but a habit for this time is go to a legal professional. We get told, if anyone's on groups or anything, avoid kind of taking legal advice or don't expect that what you see on groups is legal advice that's applicable to you. Go and check that out, either with your lawyer, and then if you go to a lawyer, check that your lawyer knows about education law, because it's a specialized field. And if you have, and if you don't have those resources, or those resources are too expensive, contact specialists in the home education field, people like the PESTALOZZI Trust. Maybe what you can do for us is maybe put the contact details.
I'll put all these contact details in the description, just for the people who want to find that kind of advice. Okay, I think this is a very interesting thing that you sort of covered, which is a very, very valuable point to note. And it's the following. It is very normal. It happens a lot that people overestimate how strong big institutions are and underestimate how strong smaller institutions are. And this is exactly what's happening during the current crisis. People that want to give the best thing for their children, they want to give them the best kind of education, so they don't bargain that hard at schools, and they believe all the stories that people tell them because the guys have some fancy titles and the buildings look nice. And some of it is definitely true, but it is also overestimated how stable those systems are. And we see that right now. That system isn't currently capable of handling this kind of problem as well as home education can, because home education is a smaller institution which is a lot more flexible. And it's like this institution of a specific form of government, let's say the Roman government, existed for a period of time and now it's gone. It's not that specific how they did it is gone. But this institution of family is still very close to how it was in those days, and it's still existing and people are still doing it. And the form of education, which was home education in the past, is still quite similar to how it is today, at least in partially, where some other things have just fallen entirely, which seemed very strong in the past. And so it's easy when you don't understand something to think it's very strong, but it's not. That's sort of, I'm just going to leave it at that. Keep this in mind. Some things I think are less strong than they appear to be, less resilient, and other things which seem ordinary, like families and parents teaching their children, are very, very resilient and is a very safe bet.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that as systems become more complex, the things that can undermine that system also increase in a sense exponentially. I don't know, maybe that's too profound a theory to discuss now, or maybe it's not even true. But I think that's a very valid point that you've made. Also, I think what you were saying, something else that you've been raising in some of these discussions that we've been having, is that people need to focus on what works for you. So perhaps the habit of focusing on what works for you or for your kids, and that there isn't kind of one way of doing something.
That's definitely a habit of the home educators I know, at least. I mean, the home educators I know do different things literally for each child they have. Maybe not very different, but slightly different between children. Some people have big differences between how they treat different children. And that is because people are different. People aren't the same. So and that's sort of the beauty and the power of home education, is you can say, well, this child is really interested in history, so I'm going to use history as a way for him to practice, to learn lots of things. So he's going to do history because he likes it, and he's going to do more of it than I probably even am interested in perhaps. But then I'm going to ask him, for today, your work today is to write an essay about the specific thing you're studying right now. And it just becomes so much easier for the child to do that with passion and with feeling, and to actually work hard at it because they're interested. And so that's tailoring that to them because they're interested in that field. Another child might really be interested in math more, and so they do more complicated problems now, and they get more time to play around with that. So keep your eyes open, realize what they like, and use that as sort of a way to make education more fun for them, and also to help them to become something that most people aren't, because then they will have more value in the world if they can actually do something interesting and complicated, not even necessarily complicated, but something that they really like and that they work hard at and become good at, and which most people don't do. That's a valuable thing.
Yeah, so what I'm gonna do is I'll give an example of that, and then I want to see if you can do the challenge of fitting that for crisis home educators and see how they can adapt some of that. But I knew someone who said that they were very bad in maths and wasn't considered academic at school at all, had been labeled sporty. But this person would actually spend hours and hours and hours studying the South African, and this to me is very boring, the South African, and not that I enjoy cricket, but the South African cricket statistical yearbook. Okay, and was amazing to me is that someone whom the school had labeled as not academic and having reading problems and not mathematical would spend hours and hours and hours studying and reading this essentially very dry and, to my mind, boring book. And the question to me always was, well, why doesn't the school take that passion for cricket and cricket statistics and teach maths and statistics and advanced math using
it's
that?
It's just too hard. It's just too hard to do it because there'll be 2 kids in the class who like cricket and the rest are going to be like, oh, no, not cricket, man. I'm showing, let's do rugby, you know? So it's just too hard, but you can do that at home. And how we would tailor that to crisis education would to be not to do it at that full extent, at such a high level, but realize that you don't have to do all of your schoolwork at such an extremely high level. Cover it, do it as you need, but don't think that it's the law of diminishing returns, right? You can do well in the work, and then you can work like double as much and go up 5%, right? So realize sort of a natural point. Stop. Don't try to get 100% on everything, or maybe even get distinctions. Maybe just go till you understand the work well enough, and then realize, okay, you're allowed to do other things. You don't have to like work at this only. So then take that extra time and pick something which your child actually likes, which has some connection to slightly. Let's say it's a crisis home educator. You want to go back quite soon, but then pick. Let's say you want to work more on your child's English. Then at least let them practice their writing, not just in the writing that they get from school. Maybe let them write about something they're interested in, because you can practice your writing really well in that. That's an easy example.
I'm going to make a couple of final comments there. One and say it actually goes back to that take time to get on your bike. So if you can find out what are those areas that your child is running next to the bike on and are gaps for them, and give them some time to do that, because when they get back to school, that will help them. They'll have a better foundation. And actually, the other thing is, what I've actually found interesting, like what a lot of parents have done, is that they've actually pushed. So sort of day one of this kind of crisis, within the first week when people were doing online education, the schools were basically giving the
too
kids
much,
this ton of work, and parents started pushing back and saying it's just too much work, which I think they should be pushing back throughout the year and saying this is just too much
the schools
work.
Give away too much work for what's necessary. Definitely, that's definitely it.
And so I think what parents can do is push back against that and say this is too much work. What is the real core skills? I think it's something that's alarmed me a little bit about what the education department has been saying. Is they've been saying we're rejigging the syllabus to focus on the essentials. And then I want to say, well, why haven't we been doing that all along?
Yeah, it should just be the essential things, and the rest should be what you're sort of interested in, your own specific things. Yeah, that's definitely how it should work.
Okay, so I think that's a thing of focusing on what works for you, what works for your family. Now, let me.
But be creative.
Share this with
be creative. Yeah. Try to cover the things in more creative ways so that you can do it in sort of pull in the fields you're interested in.
And let's just say and creativity is also about creating time. So give kids time, and only if you give kids time to look at the cricket manual, can you actually see, oh, this kid's actually really interested in cricket. This is a way that I can get them interested in
it wasn't the parents' idea to let them do math through the cricket. They just wanted to do the cricket, right?
Right, exactly. So this is the last one we're going to do, and I think we must probably be going for quite a while, so we need to finish off. But the last one we'll do is, this caused quite a controversy, because I shared this with a friend, and then I got a crazy look from her, and then she did a Facebook post, and she's got a much bigger Facebook presence about what I said than I have. and she still keeps sending me things all along. So maybe this is going to be a very controversial statement, but I really believe that I'm not allowing you to go into what is the end of education here. We're not going to discuss what's the purpose of education.
We don't have 4 hours. We don't have 4 days.
But I'm going to say that I'm going to say, so you just have to accept this for now. I know you like going to first principles. I'm going to accept this for now. I'm going to say that one of the ends of it, or the end of education, is happiness. And don't go there. And I'm going to say that we'll do a long video on this. And
I'm holding myself back.
Good, but just assume what I'm saying.
Okay.
But Maria Montessori, one of the leading one of the great thinkers in education, she said that one test of the correctness of educational procedure is the happiness of the child. So maybe you would agree with that more, or we could that's not as debatable as the first proposition. But the point is that if a child, I think the point is that, and the point that she makes is that if you see a system in which a child is continuously unhappy, that tells you that there's something wrong with that system. Yes. Would you agree? Or?
Yes, I agree. I think it's important to notice that there's a difference between happiness and ease. So sometimes people try to make children happy by telling them, you won, you're doing fine, you're trying to just build their self-esteem. That's not real happiness, right? So real happiness has something to do with overcoming difficulties, but actually overcoming them. And it also has to do with play and not having to work the whole time. It's a bit more complicated. But yes, I definitely agree. That's a good measurement. If an educational system just keeps you miserable, well, maybe it's not such a good system, right?
Yeah, and no one is saying that it isn't hard to master calculus or hard to master a particular subject for you, but there should be a degree of natural ease in that, and that should come from or either in that or in the environment that enables you to do that. So I'm maybe just a point to finish on is that I'm very convinced that where we divide people into people who are good at maths or not good at maths, or good at maths and good at arts, a lot of that has got to do with the way that it's actually taught, rather than whether people have those unique capacities or not. And that if it was taught in a way that appealed to more people would do it. And that you got to have, and so you've got to find ways that make people happy in doing what they're learning. And if they really are sitting there, if you're, I mean, there always are in life challenges, tests, struggles. But the point is that if you're fundamentally unhappy with something, you've got to question why you're fundamentally unhappy with it. So I don't know how many habits we've got to have been keeping count, but I think we've been speaking for quite a long time.
Yeah, we're
so
about. We can do some last statements to wrap it up. I think you can begin first. You can begin there.
I'm gonna give it to you. Actually, I think you can.
Okay, great. Great. I'll go for it. I'll try. Okay, so we've tried to cover a lot of ground with habits, and the idea of habits is it's something that gives a reward over time. A habit isn't immediately useful. It's useful because it lasts for a long time, or at least for a period of time. And so, firstly, don't expect everything to just work immediately. That's the first important point. It takes time to get things to actually work and to overcome previous bad habits and to get going forward. So it's not going to be necessarily very easy to do these things, but it is worth it. It's worth it to take a look at things you're doing and say, was it a good idea the way I did it previously? And this is one of the great things. There are many bad things about the current lockdown and things like that. But one of the good things is it's giving us a chance to look at things and say, what was the point of this? Why were we doing this? Is this really worth our time? And do that really, and ask yourself, was this worth my time? And if it wasn't, then perhaps you should change. And if something isn't worth your time, you only have so much time, right? If your child or you yourself are wasting 3 hours a day, every day on something that isn't really giving you back anything in which you could do more efficiently, that's like 1,000 hours a year, right? That's a lot of time. That's just gone. So take a look at this and change things that aren't working and try new things.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think and what it says about is that I think the issue is that time is the one thing we can't buy. Time is the one thing we can't create more of. And so valuing that time is very important. I think that's a hard lesson that a lot of people are learning, particularly where we see death and all these things happening around us. But I think the issue is but what I wanted to say, so in some ways, and what you've done now is undermine the purpose of this video, because we spoke about habits for highly effective crisis homeschooling. And
yes, but it's a habit of crisis homeschoolers to say, so we because it's habits, it has to take a time to begin. But the point is, we've already had quite a bit of time, right? And that the main point of our points of habits that we've been listing is to get time to get on the bike, to stop, to be okay with waiting. And all of these are actually habits that are that are being told and being shared to tell you, use these habits to basically look around and plan better long-term habits.
Yeah, and I think so. So what I wanted to say from that essentially is to say, yes, not so. A couple of things that I think people could take away from this is even if you intend going back to school next week, whenever that starts, we don't know. Some schools are open already. Some schools may not open. We don't know. There's court cases. Whenever you're going back to school, I think if you've listened to this video, I think it's useful for you to start thinking about these issues. If you're going back to school in September, you're going to be on a shorter, you won't maybe have time to put all these habits in place, but see if you can put one or two of them in place, and also keep thinking about it. If you're going back in 2021, you've got more time, and perhaps you can interrogate these habits, because we're great believers in saying, don't just believe what we say. Critically interact with us, criticize us, argue with us. But begin to think about it. We've had this pause to think about education and get off the treadmill for a little bit. And then I think finally, if you're waiting for a vaccine, then you are going to be in a longer term scenario, and you will have time to look at these things in the longer term. So I think there's value in each of those steps. As you say, people have had a break, have been off the treadmill. For me, what would be one of the worst things that could happen, and I fear that unfortunately is happening, is that all of these economic sacrifices have been made. We see it and are seeing a lot of suffering, and the system is not going to change. We're not going to actually take advantage and honor those sacrifices. And that's something that really that concerns me almost as much as this crisis itself. So you want to maybe wrap up and say the final word.
So the final.
Or you just want to say?
I'll do it.
You just want to say subscribe. Hit the bell.
Yes, please subscribe if you've made it so far. I mean, if you've made it this far into this video, then you probably would want to see something more. So hit the subscribe and the bell button, and then you'll see the next video that comes out. We're going to try to keep making a lot of these in the next period of time, because there are a lot of questions about home education. So there will be content coming out. I think the final note would be to sort of quickly run through the few habits that hit me most when we were talking through this, because Chris didn't tell me all the habits beforehand. He just went for it. So I had to So I think what stands out to me is keep the end in mind. So remind yourself what your goal is and go for that. But then at the same time, realize that it isn't necessary to work at that frantic pace that you used to work before to actually cover lots of the work. So be a bit more efficient, sort of cut down on the things that waste time, and sort of try not to do extremely well in everything, and be a bit more conservative with your time in terms of your schoolwork or your children's schoolwork, and then use that extra time you have to play around, to try things that they're interested in, and to reflect. I think that would be my biggest piece of advice. And then to make that a bit more practical is schedule time start early in the morning, do a few hours of hard work going through the schoolwork that you have to do to keep up with your school, whatever goal you have, and then stop and use the rest of your time for other things, which can be getting on the bike, which can be uncovering what you actually like, and just relaxing and learning how to do that integrated thinking. So try to do that. Just give yourself a bit of structure, and work hard when you work hard, and actually relax and play and think about this. Great.
Okay, so thank you for your time, Joshua.
Yes.
It's always
Thanks,
been a pleasure.
Christopher.
We always have these. So I surprised you with these, and you, as usual, came up to the bar. Thanks to the viewers. And
Yeah, I
as you
think
said,
we enjoyed more than you do, perhaps. But it's
and what we'll do is we can actually unpack some of these in more detail. Go into some of the underlying thinking in these things in a bit more detail in future.
Yeah, like we said, we don't want to indoctrinate. We don't want to indoctrinate. These things are all up to challenge, but we're throwing them out now quickly so that you can cover it. And please engage us with this if you don't agree, and we'll unpack them later to try to show why they are actually as they are.
And that's great because you've allowed me to put the third thing in. And there's a video in which we mention indoctrination that you can also watch.
Yes, actually, we did a video about that. So we'll link all of the other videos, and I'm not exactly sure where, probably up here and in the description as well, and as well as information about the trusts and about legal places where you can find legal advice. And so that's it for today.
Okay, that's it for today. Thanks. Go well.
Thanks for watching.